Guns N' Roses had their much-anticipated reunion concert at Coachella last night. Rumors about Axl Rose joining AC/DC were confirmed.
Some people consider Axl Rose to be a rock star, while others may only know him from his bands and songs. Rose is more than just his legacy and profession. He is a man who has experienced a number of traumas. Demons, specters, and a sad childhood. That spotlight has more to it. And it may cause you to lose heart. It's time to learn more about Axl Rose. Axl Rose was once the most captivating frontman and an idol in rock music. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when Guns N' Roses were at the height of their popularity, the slender, bandana-wearing Indiana child, who had a 5-octave vocal range, was untouchable. The ultimate rock star had a rage to match. He had the presence, the voice, and the appearance. And the atmosphere of danger that characterizes rock legends. The desire to destroy wasn't only a debut, it served as a warning that this band was going to blow the music industry away. And they did. For a time. However, Axl Rose's biography isn't merely one of achievement. A gradual disintegration, a story of brilliance warped by ego, trauma, and the impossibility the demands of celebrity. His ascent was swift, but his decline was nearly Shakespearean. In the middle of Axl Rose's legend changed the landscape of Chinese democracy and worldwide superstardom, becoming something more complex and depressing. It is simple to blame Axl for his infamous actions. The riots, the late performances, and the never-ending split among band members were a component of the show. He was called unpredictable, dangerous, and a diva. However, underlying that anger was a severely scarred individual. Axl has talked about abuse and instability because of his difficult upbringing that accompanied him as an adult. Trauma like that doesn't simply go away, it festers. Control problems, paranoia, and a lack of faith in others around you are some of its manifestations. Regarding Axl, who all of a sudden found himself in the middle of the world's most chaotic band, those scars were fuel added to a fire that was already raging. The pressure cooker that was Guns N' Roses and Axl required command. He assumed leadership of the group, gradually displacing the initial members, featured the guitar virtuoso Slash, who was essentially the other half of the GNR persona. When the original lineup disbanded, many fans believed the band had died. However, Axl continued, spent years working tirelessly on Chinese democracy in studios, a project that grew more of a metaphor than an actual album. After more than 10 years of delay, millions of dollars, and countless revisions, he was trying to get the magic back. It wasn't bad when it was eventually released in 2008, but it seemed outdated, a holdover from a long-gone conflict. However, the true sorrow is not limited to music. It's because everything around Axl was scorched by the same fire that made him great. Notoriety magnifies everything, your pain, your imperfections, your genius. Additionally, it caused Axl to withdraw, to be suspicious, to strike out. He turned into a recluse and spent years away from the public eye at once, returning to the stage as a sort of legendary character, older, heavier, and still able to flashes of genius, but obviously troubled. However, there is also a very human element. Regarding Axl Rose, he never sold out. He didn't turn into a music star or a joke on reality TV. Even when that self was untidy, irate, and difficult to love, he steadfastly remained himself. In a strange way, Axl is a symbol of what occurs when pain and an industry that values raw talent clash. Consumes people. His narrative is terrible because he might have had it all, not because he failed. If only he had managed to get away from his own troubles. Additionally, there is a type of redemption arc. Recently, the original GNR lineup made a partial comeback. Slash and Axl went on another tour. He even took over as AC/DC's lead vocalist after Brian Johnson had to resign, and by most accounts, he was spot on. Although it might not have been a complete circle, it was a preview of what might been. Perhaps Axl finally figured out how to continue without destroying everything. Axl Rose's sadness lies not just in his fall but also in the fact that he was never truly granted the equipment to manage the heights he attained. He wasn't prepared for that level of celebrity, and those in his immediate vicinity, they couldn't save him from himself. However, there is still something recognizable in that debris. He provided us with moments that shaped a time period, a mindset, and a sound that endures to this day. And perhaps that's sufficient even in the midst of the craziness. However, what caused him to become the person he was? In those years? Weight of the past. Prior to becoming Guns N' Roses' snarling vocalist Axl Rose, he was just Bill Bailey, a young man from growing up in a home filled with pain, confusion, and secrets in Lafayette, Indiana. His tale isn't it's about suffering that began long before the stage lights ever came on. It's not just about rock and roll. Given his background, it's understandable why he became so intense and erratic. Just as he did. Axl had a horrible past in addition to a difficult one. And it plagued all subsequent developments. When he was still a baby, William Rose Sr., his biological father, abandoned him. Even worse than simply leaving, he left the family with an unsolved mystery and an unhealed wound. The mother of Axl, young William, was reared as Bill, and Sharon remarried a man called Stephen Bailey. Bailey, who thought Stephen was his biological father. Just that untruth has the power to undermine a child's sense of identity. However, to make matters worse, Stephen Bailey was said to be a strict stepfather who is domineering and abusive. Axl has discussed in public the mistreatment he suffered as children, including being physically and, more horrifyingly, sexually exploited, some of which allegedly occurred when he was only 2 years old. There was more to the devastation he endured than pain. It had to do with treachery. The ones in pain were the ones who were meant to keep him safe. That leaves an indelible mark. It impacts more than just your early years. It follows you into maturity, into relationships, into your mental well-being, and into your capacity for trust. Axl's early trauma contributed to his craving for control. Doesn't it make sense? Control feels like protection when you were raised in anarchy. Afterwards, when he discovered that he held on to that control like a life raft at the top of the rock world. That's one of the reasons he had numerous disputes with fans, record labels, and other band members. He was viewed as a diva. Or a madman, but a lot of it sprang from intense emotional harm and terror. It's challenging to work together while your brain is still attempting to survive a conflict that never ended. Axl also had trouble defining who he was. As a teenager, he discovered that his name was actually, it must have felt like the ground shifting under him, not Bailey, but Rose. Consider being informed you were expected to continue as if nothing had happened after your entire life was based on a lie. After making that finding, he looked into his father's background and discovered William Rose Sr. had passed away in the 1980s under questionable circumstances, maybe as a result of murder. That shut the door on any expectation of reconciliation or closure. It was just another injury that will never fully recover. Axl's adult life was affected by all of this. He was known for having erratic relationships, particularly with women, and although abusive behavior cannot be excused, it is evident that his capacity to connect in a healthy way was distorted by early exposure to violence and dysfunction. Methods. He was frequently alone, emotionally erratic, and even violent. Notoriety didn't make it, only provided him with further barriers to conceal himself. Axl Rose's family life is tragic in that before he could even construct a foundation, it took it away. He was born. He was already burdened with a lot of emotional baggage when the world gave him a microphone and commanded him to yell. And he let out a scream. That anger, that hurt, that unadulterated, unrestrained passion, it kept him imprisoned but also made him a star. Music was Axl's lifeblood. However, it was never a remedy. The cheering of the crowd did not make the demons go away. Strangely enough, though, his voice came from the same thing that broke him. You are able to hear the suffering in each phrase of "Welcome to the Jungle," in Estranged's agony, in the coma's bitter fire. Despite the fact that the procedure almost ruined him, he transformed his suffering into art. And even though he would never have reconciled with his history, he turned it into something remarkable. Axl Rose is still a complex person today, flawed, withdrawn, and sometimes outstanding. But it's simpler to recognize the human side of him when you know where he came from. Being the source of the legend. He wasn't born a rock star, rather, he was shaped by suffering, bewilderment, in secrets need never to be preserved. His family gave him spirits in addition to a name. Since then, he has continued to sing with them. Despite the flaws in his admirers adored him throughout his life. A rock and roll wildcard's legacy. Axl Rose was more than just a singer at his best, he was a force to be reckoned with. When Roses and Guns When Appetite for Destruction debuted in 1987, it was like a shock of lightning that strikes right in the middle of the music business. Yes, hair metal was popular. However, this was not like the others. Instead of posing, Axl was growling, perspiring, and yelling. His tone could in a single sentence, change from a savage growl to a shrill scream. He sounded like no one else, and since then, no one has truly been able to match him. It wasn't just the voice, though. There was Axl. He was a force to be reckoned with on stage, pacing, spinning, and slashing the microphone stand like a weapon. His energy was dangerous and uncontrollable, giving you the impression that anything may happen at any time. At any time. On-stage tantrums, late beginnings, and full-scale riots were all common occurrences. However, people continued to return even while he was trying everyone's patience. Why? Due to the fact that Axl Rose was genuine. He did not pretend to be happy for the cameras. He didn't participate in the game. The game was him. Authenticity is linked to some of the affection that people have for Axl. He sung about being real. Grit, addiction, estrangement, anger, love, and loss. Nothing about it was bubblegum. Whether it was Welcome to the Jungle's tumultuous vitality or November's tormented beauty, he was giving it his best, both vocally and emotionally, when he said, "Rain." You could listen to the rawness and suffering in his speech. That struck a chord with people. They continue to do so. Axl never sold out, which is another factor. Although it may sound cliché, it is true. He didn't follow fashions. To remain current, he didn't switch between genres. Rather, he spent years working alone on Chinese Democracy, a project so complex and excessive to the point of becoming a joke. However, there was some twisted integrity even in it. He didn't give a damn about what people thought. He intended to release the record he had always desired. even if it takes more than 10 years. That kind of unyielding commitment to his goal, regardless of how disorganized, gained a peculiar respect. Naturally, Axl's legacy extends beyond the music. Myth is also involved. He vanished for years. He got into arguments with almost everyone. He turned into the rock star turned recluse genius. Such a mystery only heightens the attraction. When he returned at last, whether it was with a new version of Guns N' Roses or, more startlingly, as AC/DC's frontman, it felt like a myth. Fans remembered him. They waited. Because regardless of the years that have gone by, Axl Rose was still Axl Rose. There was significance in that name. Not to mention that reunion with Slash. For it seemed unattainable for years. Too many bridges were burned and too much animosity existed. However, in some way, it took place. In 2016, Axl, Slash, and Duff McKagan returned with the Not in This Lifetime tour. Collectively, it seemed unreal. Those who believed they would never see the original lineup again were reliving the fantasy all of a sudden. And Axl came through. He was singing his heart out, not simply phoning it in. Heart out, demonstrating that the fire persisted over decades of ups and downs. That is the reason Axl's legacy is so potent. Because he is flawless, he is not loved. He's adored because to his authenticity. Both in public and personally, he has endured hell, and he is still alive. He provided a voice to a generation that was disoriented, irate, or simply seeking an honest source in a universe of impersonation. Furthermore, he never feigned heroism. He simply was. Axl Rose is an example of the kind of unvarnished, flawed genius that is uncommon. His legacy isn't clear or simple to sum up. Drama, heartache, and iconic performances abound in it, along with notorious meltdowns. But despite everything, he has continued to represent what rock and roll is at its core. Concerning liberty, disobedience, suffering, strength, and disregarding the opinions of others. And that's why Axl Rose is still adored. His inexplicable absence. He was one of the world's biggest rock stars as the vocalist of Guns N' Roses. And then, poof. He disappeared. No interviews, no public appearances, no new music, just quiet. What exactly took place, then? What caused Axl Rose to vanish for so long? Guns N' Roses were invincible in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their first album, the 1987 album Appetite for Destruction, went on to become one of the all-time best-selling albums. Songs such as They Became Rock Gods because to Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet Child O' Mine. However, the fame brought turmoil. The band struggled with late gigs, substance misuse, and internal strife. Rockstar drama in general and cancelled gigs in particular. Specifically, Axl had a reputation for being difficult to work with and erratic. Slash and the rest of the band were Axl was more enigmatic, whereas they were fairly forthright about their problems. He rarely gave interviews, and they were frequently aggressive or ambiguous when he did. By the middle of the 1990s, the Axl was ultimately the final man remaining in the original lineup once it began to disintegrate. What Guns N' Roses was still officially known as. Axl appeared to back off once the dust settled. Into his own universe. He took refuge at his Malibu property before relocating to a residence with strict security. In the hills of Hollywood. He was rumored to be working on new songs, starting a new band, or simply losing his thoughts. The reality lies somewhere in the middle. Axl developed a fixation with creating what might ultimately develop into a Chinese democracy. This record was more than simply another one, it was going to be a work of art, a reimagining, and a jab at everyone who has doubts. However, his obsession with perfection led to years of studio work, countless rewrites, different band members, and millions of dollars were spent. Producers arrived and departed. They recruited and fired musicians. The record was repeatedly started and abandoned. People made jokes about Chinese democracy. Never really come out. And they were correct for more than 10 years. Axl's disappearance had a significant personal component as well. Following everything that transpired, Axl had little faith in the original Guns N' Roses lineup. He maintained a close circle, some too tight. He grew nearly withdrawn. Infrequent public sightings fueled the legend: long hair, sunglasses, and typically a frown. Additionally, he fought a highly visible struggle with mental health problems, but he didn't talk about them much. Former band members and fans conjectured that damage from his difficult upbringing. Axl was raised in an abusive, dysfunctional home, and the cost of fame had been high. Rather than embracing the limelight as several of his contemporaries did, he completely withdrew from it. After 15 years of development, Chinese democracy was more of a curiosity than a cultural event when it was ultimately released in 2008. Some individuals adored it. Others believed it was too late to make a difference and overproduced. In any case, Axl had at last came out once more. He began playing with a new Guns N' Roses on tour, and although it wasn't Axl, still had that voice. The gigs were loud and large, and they had the same charm as the original band. Then, Axl made amends with Slash and Duff McKagan in one of the most surprising rock reunions recorded. The Once in a Lifetime tour began in 2016 and continued for several years, emerging as one of the highest-earning tours in history. Supporters who believed they will never witness the iconic lineup were shown to be incorrect once more. His life's layers. When Axl Rose was in his late teens, a psychiatrist examined him and came to the conclusion that he was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder because of his defiant behavior, which was a symptom of psychosis. It's interesting to note that the same assessment also mentioned his high IQ. But later, Rose questioned the diagnosis. He clarified in an interview that his only a 500-question test was completed as part of the clinic encounter. As a result, he was assigned the manic depressive disorder and prescription drugs. Rose claimed that the drug did not improve his ability to cope with stress. It merely suggested to others that he was attempting to control his illness. Rose wasn't a big drug user, despite his colorful reputation. But he didn't avoid them at all costs, he used them sparingly. But in 1986, under a lot of hardship, he ended himself in the hospital after purposefully overdosing on pills after a fight. This terrifying event would subsequently serve as the inspiration for the lyrics of the Guns N' Roses song, Coma. Rose started supporting homeopathic medicine in her early 90s and underwent regression therapy for former lives. He made his recovery of memories public at this period. Of experiencing trauma from his biological father abusing him sexually when he was only 2 years old. Hampered his emotional growth, he claimed. Rose also had physical health issues. Problems during the tour, which he thought were caused by a subconscious self-punishment. He believed that his body was expressing his inner turmoil. Rose even engaged a psychic to provide a review during the lengthy and problematic recording of Chinese Democracy. Prospective employees' photographs and read their auras to decide if they should be hired. In his private life, Rose started seeing Erin Everly, Don Everly's daughter from the in 1986 Everly Brothers. For her, he composed the well-known ballad, Sweet Child O' Mine, and she appeared in the music video for the song. On April 28, 1990, the couple wed in Las Vegas, but Les Rose filed for divorce more than a month later. Everly fell pregnant after their brief reconciliation. They decided to name their child Willow Amelia for a girl and Shiloh Blue for a boy, however she tragically lost her pregnancy in October 1990. Rose was deeply affected by this loss, since he had desired to have children. Following yet another argument, their relationship ended, and the January 1991 saw the official annulment of the marriage. Later in 1991, Rose began a well-known and difficult friendship with Stephanie Seymour, the supermodel. She was the star of the Don't Cry and November Rain. Rose developed a close relationship with Dylan, Seymour's young son, attempting to be the type of father figure he never experienced. February 1993 saw the engagement of the couple, but ended things after only 3 weeks. According to a 2014 research, Axl Rose was the voice range-based, world's greatest singer, name. Rose gave a humble response when questioned about it, claiming that his choice in music is arbitrary and that he didn't think he was the best. He gave the name of a variety of singers he preferred, such as Elvis Presley, Freddie Mercury, Stevie Wonder, Janis Joplin, Paul McCartney, and others, many of them 70s legends. He identified Mercury as his favorite vocalist and Queen as his favorite band. Rose has demonstrated a keen interest in humanitarian problems outside of the music industry. In 2015, on April 28, he urged Indonesian President Joko Widodo to re-evaluate the usage of the death penalty in a letter. Penalty, especially when it